I know that you're very, very busy, and um, causing problems for important people is not my favorite thing to do. I feel that it's important because it appears to be very important to some very powerful people. Um, the case history of my suffering involves certain kinds of facts that go through a scrambler that are easy to verify, but nevertheless, the scrambler prevails. For example, I allowed what happened to me because I thought I was the only victim. I didn't see myself as very important. I was taught by my authoritarian mother not to think of myself as very important. She seemed to not notice the confusion I was in, the fear I was in. She did notice. She didn't seem to notice that I went deaf mysteriously, or the mountain of letters that I received from an Israeli. Well, the reason I eventually woke up was that I saw my father's work. He had left us, but he was an important person, public education, human rights field, and as a naval officer. Slowly, I began to investigate the circumstances I was in for suspicious activity. My concerns were always downplayed by the brass. Um, Certain things have come to light that they've been forced to admit were criminal activities, but only very reluctantly did they allow that a crime had taken place, and they never admitted that I was a victim of crime. When I worked at the Fogg Medical Library in 1984 and was horrified by the early materials about AIDS, there was a woman who was my supervisor named Esther Waldron, whose favorite scene in the movie she always referred to was when Inspector Clouseau wrecks a white piano, and the woman who sees it says that's a priceless Steinway. She would chuckle and imitate Clouseau saying, "Not anymore." Well, Steve Langer once said, he went to Princeton, he was Jewish. He once said, "I'm not sorry for anything I've done, only that it had to be you to me." And I think that my father's work shows that I was a potentially priceless Steinway, but by the time they were finished with me, I wasn't anymore. And the reason why they got away with it was because it was an object lesson idea to pleasure the black man who's been cheated a lot by allowing him to pile on with the idea that wrecking a white boy who had a lot of promise was somehow collecting on loss and damage by doing it to someone else. Now, Steve Langer had a poem called Spider and the Fly. And that's the game that they've been playing with me. They come from a number of directions. The postal union is one of the directions they come through. They play through cooperations in the media. Why would the media cooperate? Why is it so important to them that they would just enlist any lie that's been discredited again and again and again and again through their generator of slanders? Well, the reason is because they have a script that reads that I missed my chance to be important. And the people who control this sort of thing are people who, like Donald Trump, who feels like if you don't want everything, then you deserve nothing. Now, what they end up with is war games where everybody lies. All men lie is what they try to example. All men are lying, trust only God. Well, the idea that you can do better than that has only a few adherents, it seems like. Democracy seems to be a bill of rights to allow people to barter their lives against one another. There's no cooperation. But what happens in a place where you get a war zone going is that everybody is told to kiss the binary. You're on one side or the other. And so you either like Putin indisputably or you like Ruth Ginsburg indisputably because it proves your loyalty and how you kiss the binary. If you look at the gang who tortured me and who made pornographic genocide films of me, claiming it was a secret of science to deceive me into believing, to have delusions. I don't know where they get the right to do that, but comes from people like Clint Eastwood and the Hollywood culture that descended on me like a flock of crows when they pretended to find the script. You find that they pretended to find the script. Gail Burstyn was in Hebrew school with the gang of Cyril Wecht. Martin Edelman, Tom Gordon, Leslie Katz were a tightly knit little Jewish clique. And all of the primary slanders was worked out in the drama club between those primary actors and actresses. It doesn't get very far from that little gang. So you can see that the people who found it were the people who wrote it, and yet they have all of the cooperation from in their game from the face behind the face, which is this Wispansky culture. You know, if you talk about a cult of dictators like Putin and Trump working together, you know what they did to Navalny? They poisoned him. Well, they've poisoned me repeatedly, but there's no group of people anywhere to speak out for me. Vanessa Nakate says, prove us wrong to white Americans, prove us that you understand us. I have proved them wrong the minute I humanized Greta because she is in the Schwarzenegger wolf pack, whether she likes it or not. That's her production team. And I reached across the boundaries by humanizing her, but that's not good enough for them for some reason. Now, Greg Carl, one of the leaders who scripted some of this stuff, said that human beings are just things. A friend of the Bob Dole's, James W. Child, who I suspect was also in league with Trump, came and said that it's an extreme point of view that human beings are just things, only things. They're just objects. I wondered, had he talked to Greg Carl or something? He just said the same thing that Greg Carl said. Well, so as soon as to the people who designed the situation, I'm just a thing. Greta's just a thing. So I proved them wrong as soon as I read Vanessa. If for some reason sympathy, human comprehension, agreement, to disagree, all of the human affinities isn't enough. They want to be able to wrecker ball somebody. And I'm not saying those two women do, but the basic gestalt of the situation, the spider and the fly, is to do that. And so they refused to acknowledge that I was terribly injured, that I was victimized, that I did the honest man's thing by coming forward and talking to people about what happened. They refused to admit that. And the Wizard of Oz says, I don't know how it works. Goodbye, folks, right? The legal review center is just a few blocks away from me. But time and again, I've shown that I don't know how it works. So I might as well be nobody. And I almost don't want to know how it works when you can't step forward and discuss crime and evidence and not get any assistance. It's just bizarre. So, what we have is a situation that's underwritten by the Jewish power structure. There's no question that Israel was involved. The letters came from Israel. I'm not saying that everybody who was involved was Israeli. Greg Carl isn't. Peter Sinfield isn't. He's one of the Ouspensky gurus behind the whole thing. But Bernie Sanders is Jewish, and he clearly has not made any kind of inquiries into my welfare after the murder of Cersei was so obviously cruelly composed to torment me. So, and Billy Graham's faction is deep. Franklin Graham's faction is very deeply implicated in all of this activity by the Wet Gang. And it's a moral story for Pittsburgh that provides entertainment for them when they look at what Seattle does. Seattle works with the people who are known to have pulled the whole thing. And they just have, you know, a lot of crazy people saying, we don't care, we don't care, we don't care. You can't do anything to stop us. We've already been paid under the counter for helping Shulman, for helping the wet gang. It's on greased wheels. It has momentum. That's all we care about. So it's this free for all of things. And, you know, you step forward and say, I'd like to level with you about what's going on. And no one cares. Not anyone does. Yeah, they don't see it as an honest act. They put it through a scrambler and say you're just lying. So, you know, I missed my chance to be important in their book. Now, I think one of the things that we see in The Spider and the Fly is that it's all cruelly composed around the idea that um, people are kept in the dark and have to kiss one of the other or the other binaries. Like Putin gets his control in part from censoring information. This reports that Russia doesn't even believe they're at war because it doesn't get through that something terrible was done to the Ukraine. Well, if you look at books that were never written, one is The Wet Gang. I was talking about that little cluster of people who scripted terrible crimes and then confiscated as though it was a souvenir what they evidence of what they did and put it through a scrambler, you know, which is a mind-shattering statement of scavenging from the Jewish Holocaust survivor community. What you have is another story that's never really been told is the way King Edward worked as early as the 20s with Hollywood, with people who were building Hollywood's racist and Cold War structure, people like D.W. Griffith. He was working with them in the 20s, saying that Hollywood had to be taken control by the Church of England, Cecil B. DeMille type people who were loyal to, you know, the idea of a royal class that everybody was subordinate to. So when you get into a situation where you have like a battle royal going on, it serves a lot of purposes. I mean, we just came through a pandemic, which to me was very suspicious, but it's been swept off the table by a new binary, by a battle royal that was set up in the Ukraine. So that's the situation I see. It's a Wispensky outfit playing the spider and the fly. They're saying, you know, argue your right to exist, you thing, in a grand scheme in which the opportunity to want to be important is removed from the start. You know, it's a removable singularity. You have had your chance to be important removed by people who feel if you don't want everything, then you deserve nothing. So the totality structure of this work is the same one. You know, it's a thread that runs through Putin and Trumpington and some of the more uh, cynical members of the power structure in the world. You know, and the alternative to doing things this way would be to take cognizance of our need to um, remedy to the environmental crisis, rationing oil and making education available to people and to stop wasting money on weapons of war and so forth. Those kinds of arguments are just laughed at by some people, but it's really very true. That's what the situation is. And as Buckminster Fuller pointed out, the more contact we have, this is the first war that was really disseminated by social media. The more that we become more interconnected psychologically, the more obvious it becomes that the world wants us to work on a fabric of attempting to heal and understand one another. I mean, almost like the only chance we have. So it's peculiar, you know, that they anticipated this, and I don't think it's wise to put aside, you know, the court of the Hague The war crimes investigations and so forth, ordinary journalism needs to be deployed to understand what happened. That's basic.